we think of role models as people who are further along than we are in age, in various kinds of accomplishments. And I just feel so delighted to have a role model in my assistant, Rachel Parmet. So I'm going to say a little bit more about who you are, but welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
Rachel and I have been working together for 2 years. Like all of the phrases that come to mind, Rachel is my right hand man. That doesn't seem accurate. You're not my left hand woman. We, it feels like we collaborate, but you are my operations manager, executive assistant, brainstorming partner, person who has your eye on tech and lots of things that I don't pay attention to in order to serve couples. And we do a lot of just connecting that serves our business relationship, but it happens because we're nurturing our friendship. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. Absolutely. And thank you for saying all of those nice things. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. And actually, when talking about inviting you to my daughter's wedding, you pointed out that we've never actually met in person.
I know. And you didn't even put that together. I was like, that would be the first time we'd meet, would be at your daughter's wedding. And it doesn't feel like that because we talk so often.
Yes, exactly. So you and your husband live in Nashville.
hmm
You've been married how many years?
It'll be 9 in September, but we got married on our 10-year anniversary of dating. So we've been together almost 19 years.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, because I had 17 in my mind, which would have been true 2 years ago. Okay, so you are such a compliment to my skills and my vision in our business, but the area in which I feel like I am an amazed novice looking at you as the genius accomplished role model is when it comes to planning and enjoying vacations. Do you think of yourself as an expert in that area?
Not necessarily an expert in the area, but I definitely think it's one of my skills is planning in general. I think that shows in my career and my day-to-day life, but it definitely comes through when it comes to planning trips. Um, I don't think that we take these crazy extravagant trips all that often, but when we do, we really do. So I think that's kind of where it comes through.
You really did take one of those extravagant, expansive, inspirational, life changing trips recently, which really is the context for our having this conversation. So, will you just start sharing about the experience, where you went, how long you were there? Let's just hear how it lived
Yeah.
in you before and now.
So we just got back a couple weeks ago from 2 weeks in France. So we traveled pretty much all over France. We flew into Paris. We spent a day in Champagne and then a few days in Paris and traveled sort of south through Lyon and Provence and then ended up in the south of France. So it was a 2-week trip overall, which is actually, we realized, the longest trip we've ever taken. I think prior to that, we had done maybe a 10-day trip. So it was definitely a good amount of time. It felt like the perfect amount. Like we weren't sad that it was ending. We were ready to come home. But I think if it had been any shorter, I would have felt like there was more to do. We really just kind of got everything in that we wanted out of it.
How long before did you start dreaming of the trip? And then how long before did you start planning it, if there's a difference?
I would say I don't think there's much of a difference. I think it was probably about 8 to 9 months before that I really started planning. As you know, Alexandra, my father passed away last July, and I think that was sort of the first catalyst for dreaming up this trip was, he had been sick for a few years and we were very, very close. So he was my number one priority for, from 2020 until he passed in 2023. And when you have a terminal parent, it's really hard to make any plans in life. And we did some weekend trips here and there, but really in terms of my calendar and all of my time off, my dad was my priority, which is not something I regret one bit. But after he was gone, it sort of became clear that we have a little bit of freedom now to actually put something on the calendar. And even planning it was such a strange feeling for me because, COVID had happened. My dad was diagnosed during COVID, and it felt like for so long, you couldn't really plan anything. Like even when I initially booked the tickets and the Airbnbs, every single thing I booked, I made sure it was 100% refundable, like right up until the week of. Because I just sort of had this internal fear and trauma that something was going to go wrong and it wasn't really going to happen. And it wasn't until like a month before the trip where I was like, okay, this is really happening. But yes, I would say it was about 9 months that I really kind of threw myself into planning this trip.
The thing that intrigues me the most in my conversations with you about this trip is that you spent tons of time researching, planning, choosing, making your 100% refundable reservations, choosing restaurants, and just all the details. And I think a lot of people who spend a great deal of time in preparing for something, whether it's a vacation or something else, often during the actual experience, they don't enjoy it as much because they've put so much attention into all of the details. There's a lot of pressure that it be fantastic. People who kind of wing it with vacations, not like choosing where to go or where to stay, but like just less planning, often can tap into the pleasure of the moment and just enjoying kind of the flow, and their expectations aren't so specific. So disappointment is just less likely. But you seem to have planned in incredible detail, and the experience itself was absolutely outstanding, nourishing. Like it didn't fall short of expectations. And it's that quality, the both preparation and just marinating in the magnificence of the experience, that really got my attention. What, like, is that, do you think that's just who you and your husband are? Is that something that you pay attention to bring yourself into the present moment when it's happening? Like, what goes on inside you for the vacation to be as wonderful as you wanted it to be?
I think that is something that I've had to work on a lot over the last several years, is being present, because I am such a planner. And when things aren't going perfectly right, it's easy to feel like everything's falling apart and just totally lose yourself. I think a lot back to, it's been some years now, but our wedding day, everybody always tells you leading up to your wedding day that like it goes by so fast. And it's one of those things, you hear it a million times. It goes by so fast, take in the moment. And it's until you live it, you don't realize how true that was. It really felt like our wedding was like someone hit the fast forward button that night and everything was just speeding forward. And I was really stressed out about that event. And it's not like having a wedding wasn't really a priority for me. It was, I didn't like the whole idea of a big party and being the center of attention. And so I was anxious. And it's one of my biggest regrets. Like I look back at photos from our wedding and think about that day, and it makes me sad to think that I was just consumed by anxiety the whole day. And I think since then, I've really tried to be more present and take in the abundance and the joy. And, I work with people like you, and I've worked with, I do marketing and social media for coaches. So I've worked with other coaches too, where I really learn about how to focus on being present in the moment and how to just really soak it in and think, I planned this whole thing, and look around and say, it's here and it's amazing. And just really this trip, especially, I felt like I was really proud of myself, and I was really bragging on myself. Like Scott and I would be out at a meal and I would say like, oh, I did a good job, didn't I? And, and he completely acknowledged it too. So, really just kind of owning up to like, wow, I really crushed planning this. And that was kind of new for me to be able to do that.
If someone is listening and they're like, they totally relate, except not to the actually finding the enjoyment in the moment like you're describing, what's a tip? Like is there any moment where during this time, the vacation, you felt yourself sort of like falling back into frustration or disappointment and you pivoted. How did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, there were obviously, as close to perfect as it was, there were some things, there were some hiccups on certain days and times where I would start, really kind of losing my temper and getting upset, like, oh my God, this isn't going to be a perfect trip because, the last couple hours weren't great. And, I think that Scott and I really just kind of supported each other through that, talked it through, would really just take in the moments and get back on track. I mean, if something, like there was a day where we rented a car and we hit a ton of traffic and we missed our train and Scott lost our phone chargers while we were running for the train. They fell out of his pocket and I was, yelling at him because he lost the phone chargers and I had gotten the train time a little bit wrong. So that was partially why we missed it, but he didn't get mad at me for that. So he was pointing that out. And, you have these moments where things just aren't going well. And, I think we just kind of, once we got on the train and we're on our way, we just laughed about it. And we were really able to laugh about things like that pretty quickly. We knew that this was a big deal, that we were able to take this trip and that everything was going so well. And we didn't want anything to get in the way of that. So I think just feeling connected to one another, talking things through, being able to laugh at it, and then just, yeah, really looking around and saying, look at where we are. Look at how beautiful this is. And
We missed our train, but we missed our train in France.
exactly, exactly. And, and then things like, I thought about my dad a lot on the trip. And, that was hard for me, being that this was the first time I've ever done anything like this and not been able to tell him about it. We had the type of relationship where I would recap the whole trip for him when we got back. I'd be sending him photos of food and all these things. And so that was hard for me. But, I've been really, since he passed, trying to step into my spirituality more and just feeling like he was with me in a way. Like one thing, I kind of look up at the stars and talk to him sometimes. And I asked him to give us like really good weather on this trip. I was like, please, like, just give us sunshine. And we had literally the most perfect weather the entire trip. And so it was kind of a theme that when the sun was out and we were sitting outside and it was perfect, Scott and I would, look at each other and toast to my dad and thank him for it. And I think that helped me stay present also, just kind of looking up at the sky and appreciating that moment.
That's tender. At some point when we were talking that you plan and Scott executes. Will you say what you mean and give us an example of that?
I mean, everything about this trip on the front end, I planned. And everyone, as Scott's been telling people about the trip and talking to his family, they say, did you use a travel agent? And he said, yeah, Rachel. So he knows it. He acknowledges it. And in terms, and he, not that he wouldn't help if I was torn between two Airbnbs, he would help, look up the location on the map and look at the photos. And because he's an architect, he can look at a picture of an Airbnb and figure out like the whole layout of everything. And he also has this talent for being able to, they give you like an approximate location on a map, but he can somehow find the actual building that the place is in, like exactly the address before they even give it to you. So things like that, he's definitely really helpful, but I'm the one who's sitting at the computer, spending hours and hours researching. I'm on the forums. Like I used Reddit a lot. I used Rick Steves just to figure out, I mean, we had a whole country and 2 weeks and it's, you have to figure out what cities to go to. And there's no limit to what you can see in France. So that just took a lot of research, a lot of narrowing it down, and restaurants too. I mean, there's no shortage of delicious high-end Michelin starred restaurants and other, cheaper options. And I genuinely do enjoy reading reviews, going through. It's sort of an obsessive part of my personality that I have. And so, yeah, he definitely is there to bounce ideas off of and answer questions and help. But everything was pretty much my planning. But then once we get there, I have zero direction sense. I can't read a map. I'm not good at navigating anything. So once we get there, it's sort of like we sat down a couple days before, we wrote out our itinerary on a shared note doc on our phone. So we had everything organized, and then it's his job to, get us to the train station and get us on the train and find the car and navigate to the restaurant that I made a reservation at. And that's how it's always been with us. We're a really good team in that way. And that also helps me to stay present. It's like I put the itinerary together, but I don't have to manage it from that point once we get there.
That's amazing. You're making me laugh. I'm remembering it wasn't our first date, but one of the early experiences that Rod and I had. We went to visit some of my friends that I hadn't seen in like 15 years, but I had been there before. So he asked me before we got in the car, do you have the directions? And I said, yes. And then we got in the car and he said, okay, where are the directions? And I had a piece of paper that literally had a highway exit. And then it said like blue house on corner. And this was before GPS and phones, And so he was like, where are the directions? And I said, right here. There was no possible way that he could have used that to get where we needed to go, but it actually was everything that I needed. So I'm appreciating that you anyway are very talented in including all the relevant details. You're oriented to the other person's experience, but that you went through the document. And so he had all the information. He was well equipped to then serve that function. Okay. Well, what are some of the highlight experiences that you chose on the trip? Chose to experience?
Well, as you know, other than my dad dying, the other catalyst for the trip was that I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, and I got tickets to her concert in Paris. So yeah, that was very exciting. And it was, I have seen her in the US, and it was just something, kind of a dream I had to go abroad and not just to see her. I know some people are going to see Taylor just to see Taylor and then coming right back. I was like, this will be kind of the central focus of where we're going and why, but we'll plan a whole trip around it. So that was an unforgettable experience, both good and bad, because Europe has if you have floor seats, it's general admission. It's not assigned seating. So we had floor seats, and it was a very stressful day in terms of just getting in and standing for a very, very, very long time in a crowd of people. And I would say, the show was absolutely incredible. I have no regrets. I would do the whole thing over again. I don't think Scott would say the same. He loved the show, but the 4 hours leading up to the show were extremely stressful for him, just navigating the whole thing. But I know it's an experience we will never forget, for better or worse. So that was one of the highlights for sure. When we were in Lyon, we ate at 2 different Michelin-starred restaurants, which we've never done before. So that was a fun experience. We've eaten at very nice restaurants over the years, but never a Michelin one. And it was kind of funny. We were actually sitting, this was kind of a moment of really being present, but we were sitting in this 2-starred Michelin restaurant that was so fancy and very almost stuffy. Like no one's smiling or laughing. It was just a small place. Everyone's so dressed up. It felt kind of stiff. And I'm kind of like sitting there drinking a glass of champagne and looking around. And I'm like, I sort of started experiencing like imposter syndrome. I was like, who do we think we are? I said, we sat 5 rows back at Taylor Swift 2 nights ago. And tomorrow we're going on a private wine tour of the Rhone Valley. And we're sitting here. And I kind of had this realization that maybe after my dad died, I just kind of spiraled and threw all of my energy into planning this trip and just doing everything I wanted to do. And we were just sitting there cracking up about it because it was just this funny moment. And yeah, it's just such amazing meals. And then I'd say the highlight for me was on the last day of the trip, in the south of France. We rented a private boat, and we had a driver, but we just it was just a 2-hour boat ride on the Mediterranean. And we were staying right on the border of France and Italy. So the boat actually took us into Italy. And it was so cool. And that was sort of a last minute thing that I didn't want to plan that in advance just because I didn't know what kind of weather we would have. So it all came together in the end. And that ended up definitely being the highlight for us.
Amazing. Well, I wanted to invite you to have this request that you have this conversation just because I think, we all have a variety of attitudes about vacations, and I just find yours incredibly inspiring. I guess I'll ask one more question, which is what about coming home again? Like reintegrating to non-Michelin star experiences?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the, themes in our relationship that's always been the case is I'm the type of person when we're out of town somewhere, I'll say, we should just move here. I'm like, let's make this vacation last forever. And Scott's much more of a realist. I definitely had moments on the trip where I said, why does anyone live in the United States when this food and everything is just, it's so beautiful. It's so amazing. Um, I felt better, like healthier there. And a lot of people say this after they go to Europe that, um, they have food allergies. I know a lot of people who are gluten-free have this. And then when they're in Europe, they can eat anything. Or I have a lot of issues when I drink alcohol here, but there, I had so much wine and champagne and I never felt like I had a headache. I didn't feel like I wasn't sleeping well. So it's just, that part I think made it feel like, oh, I don't want to go back to that food and everything. But at the end of the day, I mean, we love our life here. And I think that is it here in Nashville. And that is really important, obviously, I think there are people that at the end of vacations, they cry and they get so depressed that they have to go back to their life. But, we both have jobs that we really like. We love our home. We have a dog that we love. We have a really good community here. So it was, it felt like the perfect amount of time. We were really excited to come home, and we actually had a friend's wedding the following weekend after we got back. So we had something to look forward to. And I think that's kind of, the important part is having that balance of something to look forward to in life. Always, it's good to have something on the calendar that you can be thinking ahead to, but obviously not always throwing yourself into that like I did with this trip. So, I think we had a really good balance there and it felt great to come home.
The way you're talking reminds me of a quote from Brianna Weiss. It won't be verbatim, but she basically says something like the definition of true self-care is not having a life that you need to escape from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That it's not needing to go to the spa and get massages, although that's fantastic. It's having a life that embodies self-care. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're at home and when you're in France.
Exactly. And to me, there's no better feeling than coming home from a trip, unpacking your suitcase and knowing that you don't have to pack it again anytime soon. I think it's really nice to just know that you get to relax for a while. And, now it's the summertime and we'll have other things here like boat rides, and they won't necessarily be on the Mediterranean, but they'll still be fun and with friends. And so we're lucky in that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you.